Hey everybody, this is Chad. I am To Write Love on Our Arms Director of Outreach, and I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. This is our second roundtable discussion, what we deem really things worth our conversation, things worth discussing. Last week we discussed stigma, and this week we are going to be talking about barriers to help. So effectively what barriers exist and how we overcome them individually and systemically. So yeah, again, last week we were talking about the things that keep us silent, and now we'll be discussing things that prevent us from accessing the help that we deserve. Before I bring on the panelists, I'd love to go through a few quick announcements. So first and foremost, if you missed last week's discussion, that is currently available on our Facebook page, on our IGTV page, and on our YouTube page. So those conversations are still alive and well. If you have any questions about that stream or kind of tagging on some more questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to address those. All throughout this month lead up to World Suicide Prevention Day, which happens on September 10th, we are hitting the digital pavement as hard as we can. So every Tuesday, we are releasing podcast content. Every Tuesday afternoon, we also have Instagram Lives featuring our founder, Jamie Tworkowski, and special guests each of those days. And then, of course, on Thursdays, we are here on Facebook doing our roundtable panel discussions. Follow us on social media if you want to keep up to date on when and where you can find us, or you can keep track with us via text. If you text to the number 321-204-0578, that gets you plugged into our campaign-specific text line. So our team is constantly checking that out. We're giving you tips on how you can be a part of the campaign, and also heads up whenever we're doing live events such as this. For those of you that have not ordered your WSPD merch pack yet, there is still time to order it. This is a great time to do that. We want to make sure that that gets to you in time for National Suicide Prevention Week and World Suicide Prevention Day. The pack comes with instructions on how you can get involved, but you can also always visit our campaign website, which is worthlivingfor.com. And I believe our team is going to be pinning that information. But you can also pick up the packs at store.TWLOHA.com. For fundraising for the campaign, we have a goal of raising $250,000. That's $250,000 that we're trying to raise for treatment and recovery. Currently, we are at over 40,000, which is a great start, but it's also a great time to sign up to be a fundraiser. So starting now and through midnight on Sunday night, if you raise $150 through your peer-to-peer fundraising, then we're going to give you $20 to spend in our store. So raise $150 in the next few days, and we will give you $20 to go on a little mini shopping spree. Another great way to participate is by helping us out with our annual WSPD video. So you can find out the information, again, on worthlivingfor.com. It only takes like 10 or 15 seconds of your time. The thing is, we really need the submissions by September 1st if you want to be included in this. So again, check out worthlivingfor.com for the parameters on how you can submit your information in your video. Lastly, we do hope to take a couple questions today. So if you have any questions, just feel free to drop those in the comments on the Facebook feed, and our team will be sifting through those, and hopefully we have some time that we can address one or two of those before we have to go our separate ways. I said lastly before, but really lastly now, before we go any further, on behalf of our team, we just want to send out a message of solidarity to our friends and family in Louisiana, for those living in Gulf communities, for those that are currently still in the pathway of Hurricane Laura. We see you, we love you, we hope you're all right, and yeah, just know that our entire team is thinking of you during this time. Much in the same way, we at To Write Love in Our Arms unequivocally believe that Black Lives Matter. We know that this week has brought up some deep pain that has become too frequent. So just as a reminder, you are allowed to take the time that you need. You're allowed to seek the help that you deserve. And today is tragically, a really timely conversation. Our hope is that wherever you are in life, that whatever community you are a part of, that you have the access to the help that exists. So those in the Black community, we will be sharing mental health resources specifically for you. We share these during BIPOC month. We shared these throughout the Black Lives Matters protests that happened earlier in the year. And these are resources that we believe in, that we've seen do incredible work. And if you need help finding more resources, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. But again, we see you, we love you, we hear you, and we stand by you in this fight every step of the way. That is all I have for announcements, and I cannot wait to introduce you to some of my friends, some old, some new, some that you may have recognized through previous live endeavors or through previous podcasts. And we got all of us right here. So we're gonna kind of just go around the horn. I'd love for our panelists to introduce yourself. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name, where you're calling in from, and if you represent an organization, let us know what organization that is. Let's start with Kelly.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Davis. I am logging in from Westchester, Pennsylvania, so a little bit outside Philadelphia, and I work at Mental Health America on peer advocacy, peer support, and youth and young adult leadership.
Mm.
Hi, Kelly. I feel like I wanted to have a transition before I just started talking. My name is Ebony Janiece. I am the founder of the Free People Project and Black Girl Mixtape, and I do work most specifically around dreaming and imagination. And my activism and organizing work really is centering Black women and women of color in all the ways that we're intending to actually be free in this lifetime and not waiting for our children's children to be free.
And Ebony Janiece, would you mind just scooching a little to the side, because you deserve, yeah, there you go. We got enough of our branding on the page. Let's see more.
Yeah, let me be a little bit more centered. I'm over here on Suicide Prevention Day marker. So yeah, thank y'all for having me.
It's my turn?
Yes, sir.
So I'm Stephan Monteserín. I'm logging in from Orlando, Florida. I represent Solace Counseling today. I'm also right now the interim president of the board for To Write Love Under Arms. And I'm just really honored to be with this incredible panel.
Yeah. And for the viewers, you may see another box pop in and out. That's our dear friend Yana. Perhaps you remember them. Perhaps you remember them from our earlier conversation this year around Pride Month. Yana, if you can hear us, if you want to give us a quick introduction, who you are, where you're calling from, and who you represent.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to just stop my camera really quickly because I think I've got a bad connection. But my name is Yana Kalu. I use they, them pronouns. I am the director of special projects here at Trans Lifeline, and where we...
So Yana may be coming in and out. If we miss them this time, please check out our previous LGBTQ roundtable. That was actually the first roundtable that we ever did. But Yana is a dear friend of the organization, and they are currently out in rural New Mexico. Ergo, not the best internet situation.
Oh, no.
However, if they can join us a little bit later, we'd love to have them. If not, we love them. We love their work. And with no further ado, I would love to get to some conversations about barriers to health, or barriers rather to help, to accessing help. Mm-hmm. So last week, as I was mentioning earlier in the introduction, we were discussing stigma, which kind of serves as an apt entry point to the conversation for barriers to help, the things that keep us silent. And when we discuss barriers to help, I guess let's kind of break that down. What comes to mind in your life, in your experience, in your work? What barriers, I guess, are most obvious in your roles, in your jobs?
So I will say that the first thing that comes up for me when I think about barriers is actually language, particularly for the various marginalized identities that I exist in. And so I will speak for, I would like to speak in examples. So I have a 13-year-old nephew, young Black boy. And what happens is very often his behavior is described as him being angry. And so the way that he responds to things comes across as him being angry. But the reality is he just doesn't have the language, and he's from a community, from a family, from a culture that hasn't historically had access to the language of all the feelings that he's feeling, right? So he might just be embarrassed, but he has no language for embarrassed. So it comes across as angry. So the way that he's then responded to in school, in public, is that he's an angry boy, when the reality is he's embarrassed or sad or disappointed, but he doesn't have language for it. And so I definitely consider language in the various ways that exists. I consider language as a barrier, because if you don't know what you don't know, you will only lean into, the conversation or the labeling of, what has historically been accessible to you. So language is absolutely a barrier for a lot of people in my community.
Yeah, I would also add, I think, in terms of barriers to formal services, one obviously is cost. So there's many people in the US who are not insured, and are often sometimes living in areas where maybe therapists aren't accepting insurance anyway. So you're looking at, there's a lot of really cool innovative things like Talkspace, like BetterHelp, where it's a little bit more affordable, but I think many people can't afford the help. So when you're learning about mental health, when you're, looking up things online, I think it's really I think it's really cruel, right? It's like we're telling people mental health is important, check in on your mental health, and we haven't built systems or services that can accommodate them. I think even there, right, there's the cost piece, but then even if you can afford it, even if you have insurance, there's providers accepting insurance, there's not enough providers. So, I know we're going to get a little bit into our personal lived experience, but I think too, you're often directed to just like a list of names. I work a lot with college students. They say, we can't continue to serve you on campus. Here's a list of people. And a lot of times they don't call you back, or they aren't accepting new people. So I think, cost and access to providers is big. The last thing I would say too is, in my role at MHA, I work in peer advocacy. So I'm a person with lived experience. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD, and have a lot of experience, lot of experience accessing services. And I would say a lot of the way that we've set things up was not built with the understanding of what it's like to go through a system or to go through services. So I think too, when we tell people to reach out for help, a lot of times we're saying, okay, go to a crisis unit, go to the hospital, call a therapist. But I think peer support and having people with lived experience, when I was hospitalized when I was in high school, if there was somebody like me who was there, who could tell me, this is what you can expect, these are the services that are available to you, these kinds of things, and I'm going to be with you in the community. So when you're outside of the hour of therapy a week, you have someone to talk to who gets it. I think that's really important too. So there's a lot of barriers in terms of accessing traditional services, but I think traditional services are also not built informed by people, whether that's a marginalized identity, or whether it's just, somebody who's been through a lot of services, and it's like there's so many gaps in what could be better.
Those are really good points. I think the first thing that came to mind for me, kind of with that linguistic anthropological approach you were taking, Ebony, was like this idea of our cultures of origin and the value that they place on mental health services. And so mental health services are seen as a last resort often when I progress to a point where things are no longer manageable. They're not seen as a preventative or a maintenance. They're seen as the cure. And often by that point, people have degraded to such a degree that an hour a week, like you're saying, is not going to do them much good, especially if they don't have the value system built in, and they don't have any of the tools necessary to then implement that maintenance, or they're going back into an environment that's going to activate them or take them off center. And so I come from a culture that, the conversations I believe are changing, but I'm from a Puerto Rican culture, and mental health services are for crazy people.
Mm-hmm.
And they say it like that. And it's unfortunate because anyone and everyone can benefit from mental health services. Like mental health is a part of the greater whole. I think it goes back to the conversations you were having last Facebook Live chat around stigma and how we understand what we're truly trying to accomplish culturally as we shift. And the cultural shift is just now, I think, starting. We're seeing people talk about mental health in a different light, but we still have a long way to go, right? And changing the ideas around what it would mean to jump through all the hurdles that you just mentioned. Like, it's difficult. If I don't have the perseverance because I'm not empowered, I'm not informed, how do I know what I don't know? Mm-hmm. And if it's my first time seeking treatment and I'm not equipped to jump the hurdles or have someone jump the hurdles with me or for me even, then I end up without recourse.
Totally. Yeah, I saw a tweet just yesterday, which I'm not advocating going to Twitter for therapy, but this really struck a chord. It says, look, there is never a bad reason to see a therapist. Right. So there's no level of too messed up to see a therapist, and there's no level of I feel too good to see one. So I guess just to break down that for our audience, if at any point you thought, hey, should I talk to someone? The answer is yes. You probably should. And I want to kick this to Kelly real quick, because you mentioned or you were hinting at a couple different layers of care. Like, it's not binary. It's not no help and seeing a therapist 3 hours a week every single week. There are different levels of care, including your neck of the woods, which is peer support. Would you mind discussing a little bit about what we're referring to when we say peer support?
Yeah, so I think in my work, peer support shows up in a couple different ways. So, anybody who you identify with, right, is your peer. So we support one another all the time informally. When I talk about peer support, I'm oftentimes talking about a formal peer support program. So that would be people with lived experience of mental health conditions who receive training to provide support to other people in their communities. It's really increasing in popularity, particularly on college campuses, which is where I do a lot of my work. But I also work more broadly with peer support specialists. So it's pretty similar, people who've accessed services, who identify as somebody with lived experience of different mental health conditions, and they provide a number of roles. So they're working in community mental health centers, they're working in schools, they're working in hospitals, in all the different places, in emergency departments, right, which is a huge one where people often to the point earlier, show up in crisis because they didn't know to ask for help or didn't have access to help earlier. So peers they're being embedded in all of the different places where people are and can help you get one-on-one support, but also navigate resources. I think to the kind of last point, there's this traditional way of thinking about mental health services as like you go somewhere and you receive the support. But I think, Twitter isn't therapy, but there's a lot of really great mental health resources on social media. And there's a lot of really awesome ways we can go into schools and train people. We can go into workplaces and train people to make sure, mental health isn't just this thing where you go and you talk to somebody and then you go back into the rest of your life, but it's really, for everybody, and everybody has a role in supporting their own well-being, but also creating communities and being there for their friends in ways that are informed by what we know, and not just kind of leaving people hanging out to dry.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Can I say a couple things really quick too, just to what the both of you were just saying. First of all, I meant to introduce myself as Ebony Janiece. My name is Ebony Janiece. I go by Ebony Janiece. So just for clarity, my full name is Ebony Janiece. And that's a real thing. And I also wanted to say, I'm thinking like that stigma is a barrier, right? That's a little bit of what I was saying, but, thank you so much for pulling that out even more. Like that stigma is a barrier. And I'm thinking about, how the reality is our Western mental health system is very colonized. And so it's not just the stigma depending on like what your cultural, identity, space is, location is, because I could think about being Black. I could think about being a woman. I could think about being a Black woman. I could think about how those three layers impact my access or what it is that I think about mental health or what people suggest about mental health. But then I could even go deeper and I could think about being a Black Christocentric, from this, type of reality, and think about the multiple layers of like what that looks like, and then being from the Southern Black church, and so all those different layers. And so the stigma that comes along with all of that absolutely kept me for years from having the language, the access, the knowing, the freedom, the ease to, pursue an actual, like, what does it look like for me to live into my mental health journey? The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking, Kelly, about how social media really does have all these tools, is that it's that understanding that our mental health journey it really is a journey. It's not just this place that you go to or this thing that you do once a week, or if you have, like me, I'm very grateful. It's such a privilege to be able to say this, but sometimes I'll call my therapist in the middle of the week and be like, girl, can you talk again? What are we doing over here? And so, so it's not just this, like, being able to check into this conversation or to this, to this one place, but it's like, what does even my daily setup look like? What does my community look like? What does that look like? And so, but again, if stigma is the barrier, then you don't even know how to be like, I'm okay with following these types of accounts because I don't want people to know that I'm really trying to invest in my mental health, right? Like, just even this fear around letting people know that you're getting therapy or that you're seeking help or that you're, trying to invest in those types of conversations. So I think that also is very important. And the last thing that I just kind of want to linger on about our mental health, westernized ideology around mental health is very colonized, is that a lot of the modalities that are, put forth as like, this is credible, this is what is authorized, are very toxic and traumatizing to people from different identities, right? Like, and I'm certain that if, Yana was on, Yana would absolutely, and I think I remember like reading some things that Yana, spoke about the experience of people in different identities, just as far as your body. You go into a space that can't even acknowledge your body, right? And your body as a very credible reality, and the trauma of just the space, let alone the language that's being used, let alone seeing your actual indigenous spiritual traditions being considered something new when they have been demonized when you were using those practices, right? And so thinking about the many layers of how, like, just existing in a certain identity could be impacted by, right? So there are barriers even as far as that's concerned, because not only am I trying to get to therapy or trying to get, go further on my mental health journey, I'm also simultaneously having to process all the trauma that this westernized, mental health institution is putting on my body or on my identity just for me to show up.
Totally. And I love that, Ebony Janiece, about your story that you were sharing during the podcast. You were talking about Black women in your church that really stepped up to the plate. You were able to have a conversation with someone that looked like you, that talked like you, that felt like you. And Kelly, you're mentioning that too. And Yana would say the exact same thing, that you deserve to seek help from people that you don't have to explain yourself to. You deserve to feel seen and heard and valued. And I know that as a cis het white male, that is way more accessible to me than to many, many others. So that brings up the discussion of recentering what the mental health experience looks like. Before we get to Stephan to respond on this, just real quickly, I want to mention some of these peer support networks that we believe in, and any ones that I missed. I know, Kelly, you have a couple that'll come to mind, and Ebony Janiece, I know we talked at length about some really great ones out there. I don't want to steal it from you, but Nap Ministry being one of them.
Oh, yeah. You just stole it then.
I'm sorry, I just love them so much. But our friends at NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, they do incredible peer support group. For addictions, there are NA, there's AA rooms. If you aren't a fan of 12 steps, then there are a number of other recovery options that are available to you. You can see some of those on our website under our Find Help page. In the topic of suicide prevention, AFSP does amazing peer support groups. They do grieving groups. They do solidarity walks as well. Our friends in Active Minds do campus advocacy. The JED Foundation is there to make some connections as well. We were speaking with a member of their team just last week. But let's start with Stephan and then work our way back around. Stephan, what are some other peer advocacy groups, peer care groups, if people are concerned about, can I find a network of people that look and feel and talk and are like me?
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most under-resourced, most recently, respondents. Like, there's this idea going that your attention group, you, for instance, with the mentors and the leaders in your church who understand your lived experience and are willing to enter in with you.
See you breaking up a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. Stephan, we're going to get back to you in
and hold space for that. And
it's one of those internet weeks.
Yeah.
Well, the decision was made for him. Katie will let him back in just a little bit. Ebony Janiece, would you mind sharing a little bit about some of your favorite peer support groups?
Yes, absolutely. So you already mentioned. No, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned the NAP ministry, and part of the reason we were talking about the NAP ministry in, if I'm remembering correctly, in the episode that I did on the podcast, was because I was listing. I'm always talking about decolonizing, the work that we do around being whole, free, well people. And what the NAP ministry is doing is the NAP ministry is talking about the fact that rest is our right. And so like rest is even like a part of our, like resistance, like literally rest is radical resistance. And so what Trisha Hersey Patrick is saying is that we need to really begin to do the work to understand that like our divesting from like capitalist models that keep us in pain and trauma in, that impact our mental health, clearly on a daily basis. Like some of it is as simple as like, just take a nap. But some of it is even more complex as like, what does it really look like for us to break this down and to understand how not resting is impacting our liberation, our freedom, our wellness on a daily basis. So NAP ministry is one. And then I'm also thinking about Thea Monier's work with Marley IO Consults. Thea Monier is my partner in crime in a lot of ways, but Thea Monier is a licensed mental health practitioner who is also her spiritual identity is in she practices Ifa, and so she's doing a lot of African spiritual tradition, bringing that into her own private practice. And so there's a lot of like conversation around crystals and the earth and nature and being a steward of the earth as a part of our actual healing, modalities. And then I would, of course, be remiss if I didn't mention the work that I'm doing with Dream Yourself Free. Dream Yourself Free came because I have been doing all of this work, but it was so much resistance and there wasn't any space really to imagine what would it look like for Black women and women of color, particularly, to really like think about in our highest imagination, what will we be doing with our lives? So much of it was like fighting. And there was no rest. There was no ease. There was no play. There was no space for dreams. And so Dream Yourself Free really kind of works backwards. We think about like, what would you actually be doing if you were well, if you had access to, the perfect mental health, experience for you. And so we imagine that. And then we as a resource network figure out what does it look like for us to work backwards to get to that. And so we're using dreams as the actual tool versus trying to start from the tool and move forward to getting to the, to the resources.
Yeah. And then we also have friends in the Black Mental Health Alliance as well. And again, we have a number of these resources that are listed on our page. If you need help finding one, definitely reach out. But Kelly, to you, are there any peer networks that come to mind for you?
Yeah, we have a lot of resources through MHA too. I will plug, we have an online screening program at mhascreening.org. So it has different information about mental health, but then we have do-it-yourself self-help tools, but we also have a connect page that provides access to different types of peer organizations that we support and promote. I would also say too, my favorite mental health nonprofit besides Mental Health America is an organization called Project Let's. And they started out as a college mental health organization, and their work is really framed around disability justice and all of the ways in which justice is a part of mental health. And I think that they're just really cool. They use one-on-one peer mentors. So they help people not only create communities of support, but also do some advocacy. A lot of times, particularly on college campuses, students are facing a lot of discrimination related to their disability, whether that's being kicked out, whether that's not being accommodated or not knowing that they can get accommodations. So I think that they do really awesome work, and they understand that mental health is inherently political, and we need it's not just about getting people one-on-one support, but it's about really critiquing and unpacking and reframing and rebuilding the systems and structures that keep all people oppressed and not doing well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And can you name that resource one more time? Project
Lens.
Cool. And Stephan, we got you back. Do we? I want to. I believe in Stephan. I don't know if his internet believes in us.
Uh-oh.
So all of this kind of goes back to the theme of, again, there's a spectrum of care when it comes to mental health, that even the moments that you feel like you are running up against a wall, a barrier to find a therapist, there are peer support networks that can help you feel less alone in that moment, people that you can relate to in that moment, people that have probably done a lot of research, a lot of lived experience that can help equip you with the language, that can be a pit stop along the way, that can give you hints as to where you can continue your searches if you feel like there's just nothing out there for you. So we're saying all these resources, not just to say, to overwhelm you with resources, but rather to say these are safe places to continue the journey. You're not expected to have all the answers right now, and that's okay. But at no point should you feel alone or as if no resource does exist. And if you need ideas on where to start, any of the ones that we listed are great places. If you can't remember all the ones we listed, please reach out to us at To Write Love in Our Arms. Please reach out to Mental Health America, and we'll be sure to get you connected to the resource that makes sense for you. Stephan, do we have you again?
I think so.
I think so.
I've been wrestling for like the last 15 minutes, but
I think you did it.
I'm trying to maintain decorum here. lots of expletives.
Or submission. Yeah, man. Well, we left off by asking some resources that came to mind from the therapist lens, from a counseling lens. What are some good peer support networks that you trust, that you've seen some really great work from, and then we can move on to some other points of conversation.
Yeah, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Find Help tool that To Write Love offers. I'm not sure if you had mentioned that previously. I think you cut out for like 10 minutes. Okay. So yeah, it's relatively new, but it's aggregating a lot of resources from all over the country. You just need to enter your zip code, and it connects you to resources and to clinicians' practices all over the country. And I think into Canada now, Chad, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I cannot verify that.
Okay. I might be making that up just to sound good, but if you go to the Find Help tool, you'll find out.
Soon. The answer.
We hope. Okay, yeah. And there's also the substance abuse mental health. I know Denny mentioned it, the SAM-SHA, and they have a treatment locator resource that I think is pretty good to go. And if you're struggling with specific issues that you want to really explore, that your therapist is competent to explore with you, I think that'd be a great resource as well.
Yeah. And if y'all don't mind, maybe briefly we can take this out of the realm of rhetoric and put some skin on it. Would anyone care to share kind of your own lived experience with some barriers that you have encountered? Maybe it's in reference to your key identifiers, or maybe it's on behalf of friends and family or people that you serve. But you know, what do some of these barriers actually tangibly look like?
Mm-hmm. I will say, just piggybacking, Stephan, I appreciate you talking about this tool that you all are building on the website and that is expanding, because I think sometimes when you talk about being able to find somebody that speaks the same language as you, maybe people don't understand how powerful that it will be for you in therapy, how, you know, essential that is. And I just give this funny example. I was in therapy. I had a therapist when I first moved to New York a couple years ago. And I remember the end of a session, she was trying to check in with me because we had a heavy session. She was like, you know, how are you feeling? You know, what are you feeling right now? And I was like, life is a funny thing, girl. And that is a quote from a Different World episode. And the fact that she just understood it just literally made me melt because I didn't need to explain. Like, she literally understood, like, oh girl, I got it. You know, it was, and so those moments of like imagine having to figure out I was dating this, this is random, but here we are. I was dating a French-speaking African man. And I love this about him, but it also was an issue in our relationship. I love that he would be like, I don't understand what you just said. It was very beautiful, but can you break it down for me again? Like, it was like, we always had these layers of like, can you break that down for me again? And so imagine trying to like pour out the issues of your heart and somebody saying to you, that sounded nice, but can you break that down for me again? So I wanted to kind of like, I guess when you talk about putting some skin on it, that for me is it may seem silly to somebody who hasn't, you know, really gone deep into their journey. But once you find the person who speaks your language and speaks to and understands you, and like, you don't have to do the filter of like trying to explain what you meant by, you know, life is a funny thing, girl, you know, like those things really make a huge difference. And so for me, I'm very grateful that the very beginning of my mental health journey, probably about 11 years ago, the earlier, you know, push season of it was a deacon at my church who was a licensed mental health professional, who basically was able to kind of like on the record, off the record, look at me and kind of like, you know, shake me into some, you know, the right direction. And I don't know if it wasn't for her, if it wasn't for that kind of sister, you know, discussion and speaking my language, I don't know if I would have continued in my therapy journey. I don't know if I would have, you know, been on that track for as long as I have been now. So yeah, that tool, I think if people don't understand how powerful it is to be able to really filter and find somebody who has access maybe to your, it doesn't have to be your exact identity, you know, all the ways that you show up, but it is powerful and helpful to go into therapy and feel seen.
And yeah, so what Stephan and EbonyJaniece were just referencing, on that Find Help tool on our website, you can select identity filters. You can select age, you can select gender identity, you can select sexuality, you can select race, any of these things, and we're going to do our best to whittle down options that you will feel most understood by. But yeah, so EbonyJaniece was just speaking about a hint towards her lived experience, and we have that story in a bit longer form on the podcast. It's been one of my favorite podcasts. Everyone, please go check that one out. But Kelly, what comes to mind in your experience with barriers to accessing help?
Yeah, I think one is something that I got at earlier, which is just trying to find help is not very accessible, particularly if you're really having a hard time, right? If you're really depressed, if you're having like any kind of executive functioning issues, I've had to ask other people to help me. Just the process of looking for help and finding people and waiting for them to call you back and those kinds of things. I think that there's, in the world where we have so many things, we should be a lot further along in how easy it is for people to find a therapist or find somebody to talk to. I would say too, another piece is that oftentimes there can be limited therapists specific to like the needs that you have. So for example, I've been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So part of my experience is issues with dissociation, and part of my experience is a lot of suicide attempts and issues with suicidality. And I think many therapists aren't trained to really understand the full concept of trauma, and that it's not, it's not just talking, it's embodied, and there's so much that goes into that. And I think that it can be further traumatizing if you're talking about your trauma to someone who really doesn't understand. And I think too, for folks who have dealt with suicidality a lot in their lives, a lot of times you can be treated poorly by therapists who are kind of afraid of your risk. I know once I saw a therapist who was like, well, due to your history, every time you come and see me, I'm going to ask if you're going to kill yourself. And I was like, this is the only time I'm coming to see you, because that's like very intrusive and I don't feel supported at all. So I think there's specific issues too, where there isn't as much there isn't as much availability. And I think when you don't have connection to peers or other people with lived experience, because I can say this has been part of my experience too, as being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, is oftentimes you're treated as not being an expert on yourself. And if you don't have access to this idea that like, no, you can say no to your doctor. You can find, we can help you find another doctor. Like, you don't have to just listen to what's told, because a lot of times people feel so disempowered by services that they will leave. And it's a huge failing of the system. So I think too, a major barrier is folks aren't empowered, and they don't have systems of support where they understand that, you're also the expert on yourself, and can say this works for me and this doesn't work for me. And, it's not just if therapists and professionals can do harm, and there's nothing wrong with you in particular if somebody's not able to meet your needs.
I really love those conversations of empowerment. And you were even referencing that at the beginning of your response when you don't know where to go for help. And Stephan, you could probably speak to this, but so often if we see a friend going through a tough time, our kind of wired response is, oh man, that really sucks. Well, just tell me what you need. And it's like, well, I need this to not suck anymore. And I am kind of at my wit's end. So how can we as friends and loved ones empower our friends and really break down a barrier beyond just saying, let me know what you need? Maybe what are some other ways that we can step up to the plate and anticipate needs?
Can you repeat that last part? You cut just a little bit.
Oh yeah, anticipating needs. Instead of asking our friend what they need, come with some options in hand to say, instead, hey, what do you want to do? Versus, hey, I got a list of some counselors. Do you want to look through this and with me? And if you need a ride, I'll take you. Or what have you seen as, I guess, enacted demolition of barriers?
I'm seeing it from the clinician's point of view, more in the room with people who are hurting. And so I think by the time that people are in a position where their pain has gotten the better of them, all our cognitive functions are not online, all our emotional resources are spent. We don't necessarily have the wherewithal to know how to represent ourselves in the clearest fashion. But like Kelly was saying, we are still the experts on our own experience. We know something is going on. But even like Ebony Janiece said, we don't have the language at times. And until we're able to be in an environment where we're conducive to receiving again, right? I'm with somebody that is safe, that I can trust, with which I can be vulnerable and be open again, whether that be a peer support group, a culture of counseling amidst peers, in a church environment, in a whatever type of community group it might be, I'm not going to be in a state to receive well. And so I think the best thing that friends and other supporters can do is be consistent, be available, continue to ask the question. The question may not be the most relevant one at the time, what do you need? but be informed about what you're able to offer. So I can help you find a therapist. I can call the numbers and see which ones take your insurance. I can sit with you. I can call the psychiatrist's office and find out if they're informed about what you need, especially being trauma informed, like Kelly was saying. That's such a huge and important factor in terms of therapist training. If you're not able to trust that your therapist knows what they're talking about or can speak to your pain directly or understand how to hold space for your pain, then it'd be helpful to find someone else. If I don't have the energy and I'm unclear about what I actually need, I could stay with a therapist too long. I could stay with an undertrained therapist for longer than I should be. I might not find the right therapist that I need. And I see that often. I often interview people at the beginning and just ask them a little bit about what's going on to find out, hey, am I qualified? If I'm not qualified, it doesn't hurt my feelings that you go and see someone else. I'm working for you. I'm working for the client. And so I always want the client to feel empowered in the room, to know that their needs are going to be sufficiently addressed.
I'd love to move the conversation along. We're starting to run a little bit low on time, but here's a kind of a series of questions that I think kind of speak to the current climate that many of us find ourselves in, which is, for far too long, conversations about mental health have been conversations synonymous with privilege. I think that there's been, for lack of a better term, like poster children of mental health, that someone struggling with mental health issue X, Y, or Z will always look like X, Y, or Z. One example is 9 times out of 10, that's my own made up statistic, but so often when conversations of suicide are brought up in the media or around the dinner table, the focus is on what? It's on youth suicide, right? And the reality is the possibility, the risk of suicide increases with age. And that's just, one slice of the pie here. Just last week, there was an article that came out. Jonathan Singer, who's the president of the American Association of Suicidology, he says that the work of suicide prevention is grounded in the assumption that people live in a world that believes their life matters. Singer, who is white, was saying this. He said that many people of color, however, do not see that world of mental health as their own. On a practical, daily level, society gives explicit and implicit messages that it's white lives that matter and black and brown lives that don't. So I was mentioning earlier that as a white male that's coming from Middle America, I've had a number of options for me. And I'm wondering, for the people here on the panel, have you ever felt as if a mental health PSA was speaking to you? Have you ever felt like you've been seen by people telling you to go get help?
I will say no. I think that whenever there is supposedly a message crafted specifically for me, is usually just wrong. It makes me wonder who was in the room when they decided to say yes to this, language. It's like that McDonald's commercial. I should have said McDonald's out loud, but I did. But it's like, that McDonald's commercial where it's like somebody like kind of shucking and jiving, and it's like, come get a burger. And it's like, who is this commercial for, really? And that's often what it feels like when there are targeted messages specifically for Black people, specifically for women of color. It's like this, the most stereotypical version of the, conversation that could happen. And then it's like, do you feel seen now? No, I do not. So I want to answer that question. And then I want to cite Kelly Davis of Mental Health America. 2 things that Kelly said that I feel like I don't want the audience to have missed, and it applies to this question as well. That mental health is inherently political, and that absolutely applies to the question that you're asking, Chad, because it's political. Because if you can exclude whole people even from the messaging of who is worthy of or who should have access to mental health, then clearly people's whole identities have not been considered. And that is not accidental, that is intentional. So mental health is absolutely inherently political. It's inherently political because the creation of the institution in these United States of America and to the republic for which it stands was created for a particular group of people. And so there were all these identities that were not included from jump. Therefore, if we are in 2020 still trying to advocate and talk about stigma and barriers, then very clearly we're trying to make up for something that was inherently exclusionary from the jump. The other thing that Kelly Davis of Mental Health America said that I really wanted to point out, which was very powerful for me because my work is rooted in decolonization, is that I am an expert on myself. And for people of color, I would say people in various marginalized identities, but for people of color, for Black people specifically, authority is such an issue, right? And I'm a spiritual religious leader as well. So I have to like think about God really quick. Like for a group of people whose gods have, that's not the way I want to go. For a group of people who cannot consider a God that might look like them without it being demonized. So we're talking about the top authority figure, right? So it's this whitewashed reality from jump that the authority is this white guy in the sky with a beard. Therefore, to ever trickle down to like the least common kind of reality of being in charge of anything, you're certainly not in charge of yourself. All of the theology, all of the preachment, all of the teaching from your time of birth entering into these religious and spiritual truth systems and, you know, institutions is that there is this is who's in charge. You're never in charge. So to get to the point where you have to begin to try to advocate for yourself that I know my body, which has been shamed, demonized, you know, right, like all the multiple ways that bodies are even considered bad. Then you live in a society that says that your body is bad and your body can be shot, tased, murdered, thrown away, discarded, right, just because of being in this wrong body. So it's all these multiple layers of how, like, of course, you would never, ever, ever believe that you're an expert on yourself. You have been trained to believe that you need to submit to the authority of submission. Is such a language that, you know, is a part of that language that we use growing up in the church, especially, right? Submit to something, some other authority, something outside of yourself. And so I really just wanted to like really beat that down, like what Kelly said about I am an expert on myself, is that if people don't leave with anything else, I hope that you will leave with the knowing that is a fact, that being able to advocate for yourself, even if you look stubborn, even if you come across as like hard to work with or hard to serve, it is important for you to say, I hear what you're saying, but I know what's happening in my body. I hear what you're saying, but I know what's happening in my mind. I hear what you're saying, but I know that this experience, there's something more to this, or that this is not fully serving me, because you absolutely are an expert on your body. There is no person, being, deity, existence that knows you and what you need better than you. And if the only language that you have is, there's still something more that I need, there's still something missing, that is a very powerful knowing, right? Like to authorize yourself as the authority of yourself.
Come on.
Will literally save your life. If you can at the very least get that piece for yourself. Like, I get it that you went to school, but they were not teaching you about Ebony Janiece's body specifically. So we're going to still need to keep digging and prodding until we get to my actual needs are being met, because you don't know me better than me. And that's just the end of that sentence, right? So thank you, Kelly Davis, for saying those two things, because they really, like, I had to write them down. I was like, I don't want us to miss, you know, that is important. And the only way that we will get through over these barriers is if we acknowledge that, like, this whole system is colonized and is political in the first place. And so, like, we're not just dealing with mental health as like this woo-woo idea. We're dealing with a whole institution that could completely erase people and has historically done that intentionally.
Yeah. Just to add on top of that, so I do look like the person I think a lot of people have in mind when they're creating these things, right? White middle class women, and a lot of people who are in positions of service and leadership, right, look like me and share common things with me. So I don't, you know, to that point, yes, I do know that I look like kind of the person they're thinking of. But to amplify what was just said, I think the point earlier about mental health being political, right? I think it's just a really important idea that I also want to just amplify, is that like there's on one hand this idea of healing and reducing suffering, but I think on the other hand, a lot of times, if unchecked and uncritically examined, the mental health system and like this, like as an idea, but as it functions, will serve to adjust people to the world, right? It's like, you shouldn't feel that way. Oh, sorry, I have a puppy. Let me do something to you to make you feel better. And I think that is, if we're in this movement where we're bringing everybody into mental health and everybody into mental health services, if we cut that out, we build the same problem and just further entrench it into at least the US culture specifically.
Yeah. I wanted to make a comment on the political as well, kind of in the nuanced way that we use language and the way that we understand like this false binary of like well and not well. So I was diagnosed manic depressive. I was in high school. They've changed it now to bipolar. It was bipolar 2. And I went in and had a brief assessment with a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed and put on medication. And there was something within me that the power system diagnosed me with. It looked at me, saw a problem there, made a diagnosis, and then released me. So now I'm the one who carries the shame away. And it wasn't that there was something wrong with my environment, or there wasn't something that was wrong with the culture at large. There was something that was wrong with me, and I had to wear it. And I think it was a burden I carried for many years, with a deep misunderstanding of what was really going on. And I think that's the way that power structures are then reflected outwards, and we see that nationally in the way that our country is hurting, the way that our world is hurting at a larger level, all the way down to the individual and the way that we carry the pain and the stigma in ourselves. And I think what mental health could do, beyond diagnosing or beyond saying that you're not well and you need to be well, that false binary, is to say, hey, you live in an environment with a lot of stimuli that's affecting your heart and your mind and your spirit and your relationships, and this has been generational, and you are bearing forth the evidence. How can we help you to navigate that better? And so when we're talking about disease and the disease of the pandemic of suicide, that's just the manifestation, right, of people in pain. Of people in deep pain and despair and not knowing how to carry the pain anymore. I'm crying out, right? And so I don't just want to address suicide. I want to address the political structures that allow this to exist at a much more foundational level.
Stephan, I'm just going to jump in really quick because I got emotional, of course, and I felt emotional because I think that is so major, like this, the binary of well, unwell, which is very ableist anyways, right? Like, it's just absolutely ableist language. But additionally, because we don't, like, thinking about the political, is that a lot of, like, it's not even that you have anxiety because something is wrong with you. You have anxiety because people are dying. And like, of course, your response, to people dying would be to feel anxious. And so, but instead of having that understanding, there's like this language of like, something is wrong with you because you're experiencing this thing. No, it's a response to this trauma that's happening on a daily basis around us that we don't have language to even process. And so that kind of relief for me to realize that some of my own stuff wasn't because something was wrong with me, right? Like I mentioned that I grew up in the, Southern Black Christian church. And so what I said in our episode of, the podcast was that I remember having to go to one of the elders at the church and say, does this mean I'm not saved? Right? Like I thought that I wasn't saved because I was experiencing depression. And I'm very grateful that her response was like, no, this makes sense that you would feel like this. This is the response to what's happening. And that healed me. That healed something in me, right? That I didn't have to carry around the shame of how I was feeling or what I was experiencing, that there was like, okay, thank you. Now there's some relief. Now we can, begin this journey. So thank you so much for talking about that, that binary that we kind of live in of like, well, unwell, like, and the stigma that comes along with that of like, no, this is the natural response to what's happening in our society.
Yes.
I think to that end, what was kind of being pointed to, at least in my mind there, is that as we address our language, as we build out a more proper language, I think it's to acknowledge that we're never going to cleanse our speech enough to do away with suicide. Making inclusive language only helps drive the conversation further. Just correcting your speech is not going to end this public health problem. However, at that point, it is never my job to tell any one of you or any one of you watching this what hurts and what doesn't. You do not need to justify your pain at any level, but the hope is to raise our consciousness enough to say, look, if I see someone in pain, my job is not to explain it away. My job is to be present with you, to co-suffer with you, and hopefully to collaborate with you in finding a solution. I am of the belief that suicide is the fatal result of a restricted perspective. So our task is to speak more than just what depression is saying to you. Our friend Levi the poet says that there are voices on the outside of your head too. So it's our job as a community to make sure that you feel heard, that you feel seen, that you feel cared for, and not that we can fix you with a quick conversation. I don't want to fix you. I just want you to be here tomorrow. And whatever it takes, we'll fight to make that happen. If that means bringing on more panelists so that more of the audience feels seen, we're doing that. If that means connecting you to resources that identify with your key identifiers, we're going to do that. And for people that just love people that look other and have experienced other lives than your own lived experience, then you can still be an advocate. You can still do research on behalf of your friends and loved ones. And I will dismount from the soapbox. And Stephan, you got us all emotional here, man.
Good.
You got us in our feelings. Hey, I know that, again, we're starting to run short on time, and we've been dancing around it, but if we could briefly address this. What advice or encouragement would you offer to someone who feels as if their access to mental health care is currently impeded?
Can I say one thing? I have to go really, really soon. But I wanted to say to that mark, and to a little bit to add on to what we were saying previously, you are not the chaos, right? The chaos is the chaos. Sometimes the chaos gets on us. And so I think a lot of mental health and mental health services are about helping people to discern between what is me and what is not me. And I think making that differentiation, I'm able to navigate within the chaos with a little bit more stability, a little bit more know-how, and a little bit more compassion. And continuing to show up for yourself when you don't know how, right? And beginning to connect with the capability and that consciousness is the journey of mental health, is the journey of growth, really, of transformation. This has been such an honor. I'm so glad to meet you, Kelly and EbonyJaniece. Thanks, Chad, for having me on.
Great seeing you, man.
Peace. I'll connect with you on the side, everybody.
Sounds good.
I will, speaking to what you just said, I know that Kelly is going to have something profound to suggest. And so my suggestion is, and I'm even thinking about, just the collaboration. The first thing that I thought about when you asked this question or presented this question is really going back to that expert piece, which is really actually a part of my lived practice as a womanist, that my education, my lived experience, and my ancestors make me credible. And so really that is really why what you were saying, Kelly, really stood out to me, because I really am in charge. There really is no higher authority over me, over my knowledge, over my knowing, over my being than me, period. And the ways that I am credible is because of what I just said, my education, my lived experience, and my ancestry. And so, and what I mean, even, by the ancestry pieces, there are things that I know that I don't even know why I know them, but it's been passed on to me. I show up in ways that certain people will just never understand and maybe never have access to, because their ancestors didn't, they weren't weavers, they weren't bakers, they weren't, whatever. And so we see this, as a reality that there are ways that you can be just because your great grandmother was, and maybe you just didn't have access to that knowing, but that's just the reality. So that expert piece feels very important to me. And so one of the things that I would say to respond to that is I think that when we come to the place where we feel like there is nothing that's speaking to my personal need or my current condition, and of course this is layered because there are some people that are going to need greater assistance than just peer, group. But I am a proponent for, if it doesn't exist, make it yourself. And so, so figuring out ways and so it's that self-authorization, right? Like knowing like, okay, I am an authority. I do. And there are other people that speak this language as well. So let me just find my people then. And maybe we don't have like all kinds of degrees or, maybe we're not considered credible or authorized, but we're credible on our lived experience. And so if we have nothing else but the ability to share our lived experience, that is profound and phenomenal. And it literally will begin to, support you on your journey. So I feel like there are so many of us that are suffering in ways that we don't feel seen, we don't feel heard. And so there are moments when maybe it might look like having to create it yourself.
I love that.
Yeah, I second all of that. I think having somebody else who says me too, right? Like shares, reduces the shame, makes you feel less alone. The world, like people feeling a sense of despair means that you are paying attention to what's happening in the world, right? It's not anything that's wrong with you personally. And I think, I certainly say, reach out to people like you, find communities of people like you. But I think from my lived experience, and like one of the reasons why I mentioned in the check-in, TWLOHA like got me through high school and college a little bit, just like the community and the ideas. And I think this idea of hope. And for me, situating myself, similar to kind of what you said, situating myself in the context of a movement. The peer support movement in mental health really comes out of when folks were released from the large-scale psychiatric hospitals in the 60s. So it's inherently political. It's about civil rights. And it's about the world wasn't built for people like me, but I can build the world for people like me. And like, that's the thing that I think is, even on days where like I can't do it anymore. This is too hard. Even with access to things, it's like, okay, there was somebody like me who kept going, who made the world better for me. And I want to pay that forward and be of service. And when things feel too hard and when it feels like I can't do it anymore, I just think about like be who you needed when you were younger, who moved through their pain so that the world could be better for me, and how can I be that for the future? So situating yourself, there's people who came before you who've been doing this, there's people who will come after you doing this, and it's not just you, you're part of something.
Damn, Kelly.
I love Kelly Davis. I love you.
to tie that back into Ebony, Ebony Janiece was talking about the role that our ancestors have played, our forefathers, our foremothers, our four siblings played in the formation of our identity. You will get to be an ancestor to someone else's mental health journey. You will. And if we're going to bring this in for a landing, that's worth living for. It's worth living for, building upon that story. Just one more page, just one more chapter, and you never know how that is going to radically affect someone's mental health journey in the most positive and impactful way. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Yana. Yana, we're going to catch up with you later. Yana is going to try to write some notes for us. So we'll find a way to publish that somewhere in To Write Love blog or social media land. Stephan has been chiming in on several of our Instagram lives, so you can check him out. You can also follow Solace Counseling using the social handle Solace Counseling FL. That's SOLACECOUNSELINGFL. My friend Elizabeth is going to be transcribing this, so I think that's really funny. You get to write all that out. So Kelly, where can we find you and your work on the World Wide Web?
Yeah, so you can find Mental Health America on all social media platforms. I want to plug our screening resource. It's mhascreening.org. And I will also plug, we have a free virtual conference next week with all awesome presenters on lots of different topics. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about civil unrest and racial justice. So definitely check that out. You can find that on our website as well.
And your website is?
mhanational.org. And for conference, it's mhanational.org/conference.
Awesome. Ebony Janiece, where can we find you?
You could find me at EbonyJanice pretty much everywhere. Even EbonyJanice.com is my website, so it's easy to have access to me. And I will plug that I am currently on lecture 3. It's starting in September, lecture 3 of a lecture series that I launched a few months ago. The first was White Urgency is Violence. The second was Sustaining Joy in Your Anti-Racism Work that I co-lectured with Thea Monnier. And then in the month of September, I'll be doing a lecture called Womanism is to Feminism as Purple is to Lavender. And it's a conversation around the actual inherently intersectional nature of womanism, which is Black women's gender equality work. And I think it's important even in the context of this conversation, because in these times, we need to figure out what a sustainable anti-racism model looks like. And womanism historically has been that sustainable model. And so people wanting to learn what it looks like to contribute in those ways can have access to that through the learning in these lectures and this lecture series, particularly this one coming up in September. And you can get that information at EbonyJanice.com somewhere. It's there somewhere. I think it's on the lecture series tab somewhere.
That's excellent. Well, thank you all again so much for being a part of this. To the viewers, thank you for being a piece of this as well. We're going to be back live on Instagram next week. And if you are, that's next Tuesday. We are going to have some time with our friend Andy Slavitt. If you are curious about where the political intersects with the mental health world, we're going to have some great information there on how you can be active politically and be an advocate for mental health at the same time. Keep an eye on our social media, keep an eye on our community text line, and keep an eye on one another. Thank you so much for being here. We're glad you're here, and we can't wait to catch up with you next time. Next roundtable is next week, 4 o'clock, facebook.com/2WriteLoveOnOurArms. Have an excellent weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks.